Watch Symposium. I'm Austin, and this is the second part of Watches Journeys custom video. If you haven't seen part one, link in the description, check it out. We looked at his 5-piece collection, and as we left it, he had narrowed it down between 3 watches that he thinks he can get at his authorized dealer here in 2021. Number 1 was the Explorer, number 2, the Explorer 2, or whatever's going to replace it, and number 3, the Deep Sea James Cameron. Now, in this video, let's talk about the Explorer. What the hell is the Explorer? Well, let me just say that I think there are 2 amazing aspects to the Explorer. Number 1, the name Explorer, all right? What a cool name of a watch, and it just brings up images of adventure and exploration. It's one of the best things about that watch, and also its wearability. And that's something people love about it. They often say it's a classically designed, simple watch, wearable in pretty much any situation, any scenario. And that's because it's based on an everyday watch, an everyday wearable Oyster Perpetual. And let's go back to 1953, May of that year, Norgay and HeII summited Mount Everest, and at least HeII did so with a 34mm Oyster Perpetual with a white dial on his wrist. Went up the mountain, came down the mountain, was running fine. And for 2 decades before that, since the early 1930s, or even prior to that, actually much prior to that, Rolex was giving their watches to people in the field to test them. It was a twofold thing. First of all, they got to market the watches as usable, and they also got to test them in real-world situations. The question is, was this a tool watch that they gave HeII? And that's a good question. Now, it was souped up a little bit, and unlike the typical bubble backs of the day, it had a flatter back that sat better on the wrist, and that's an element that has extended to our modern Oysters. But essentially, it was an Oyster Perpetual. And an interesting question to discuss over a beer would be, would the Explorer have ever existed without that 1953 successful summit of Mount Everest? And a great case could be made that it would have, because 4 months earlier, in January of that year, they registered that name, Explorer. So there might have been an Explorer either way. Did they think that HeII and Norgay were going to succeed? My guess is they didn't know. They didn't know if Norgay and HeII were going to succeed. They probably thought, we might never see these guys again, and we might lose this watch. They might not make it. But they did make it. And 2020 hindsight, I think if they had known they were going to make it, they probably would have sent them up with a better watch. Now, years after that, when I say years after that, it happened pretty quickly, starting in 1953, but the design as we know, the Explorer with the black dial 369 indices and Mercedes hands, which by the way started on the Explorer, well, that typical configuration took a while to come to fruition. And I think that they were sort of rewriting the design history of that watch in the past, because if you look at the actual watch, it looks completely different. The typical Explorer that we think of, whether you're talking about the 36mm or the current 39mm, it looks different. It looks more sporty. But what were they going to do? Because they had to base it on that watch that summited Mount Everest. I mean, you can't let an accomplishment like that go unnoticed, unrecognizable. I mean, that is marketing 101. They had it right there. But they couldn't really do things like put a rotating bezel or an informational bezel or crown guards on the watch, what you would expect, what a real Explorer's watch should have. They couldn't rewrite the design history of that watch to that extent, so they did the best they could. That same year, 1953, was the year of the 6006, the Turnograph, the first watch, well, no, the first in a series of watches with informational rotating bezels. It came before that, and actually Rolex borrowed the design from a gentleman, but we won't go there. We'll just say that this turnograph was the predecessor to many of the professional informational bezeled watches that we love, the Submariner, the GMT, and it really was, in my opinion, the start of the tool watch and the real tool watch. Okay, now, what the hell is the Explorer? Is it a watch for explorers? Well, not really. Okay, is it a watch that pays tribute to an accomplishment? In a way, yes. Okay, and in fact, that's probably the main point of that watch and what it really is. And it's a piece of marketing, to be honest. And the Explorer was pretty much obsolete a few years after the summit of Mount Everest, certainly after 1959, because by then we had the 1675, which was the GMT, and it had an informational rotating bezel, and it had crown guards. It was what real explorers, really real explorers, not regular average Joes who wanted to feel like an explorer and see it on their watch. It's what real explorers would have gravitated to, along with the Submariner. So pretty quickly, within a decade, the Explorer was outdated. All right, there were bigger and better and more capable watches in the Rolex range, but it existed because it was a little piece of history, and it was something for the average Joe to get. He'd be able to look down and see that Explorer on the dial and feel that air of adventure. It's marketing 101, all right? And that brings us to what the hell the Explorer is today. Is it a Sporty Oyster Perpetual? In a sense, yes. Now, if you want WJ, the purest Rolex, that would be an Oyster Perpetual. If you want the true Everest watch, that would be a 34 millimeter white dialed Oyster Perpetual. And an Oyster Perpetual is a great watch. In fact, they've got the newest movements and the new clasp and a range of sizes and a range of beautiful dial colors. And in my opinion, it's a much more interesting watch, and that's where I would go because of the purest aspect. But the Explorer is a little bit more sporty, all right? And it's got the 369 dial. They're not going to put that on the Oyster Perpetuals anymore. If you want that on an Oyster Perpetual, you could always go with a 116000, the 369 dials there. Now, it also has, talking about the Explorer, the Mercedes hand, and again, that gives it a more sporty vibe. But is it an Explorer's watch? No, no. It took Rolex 18 years to actually release what they should have sent HeII to the summit of Mount Everest wearing, and that's the Explorer 2, 1655. It had a informational fixed bezel so it wouldn't get knocked around, and that coincided with the fourth hand, which was essentially an AM/PM indicator. It had crown guards, pretty essential for a rugged watch, and it was marketed as a spelunking watch, a caving watch. All right, Rolex, whatever, but it's the watch that a true explorer would wear and would want to wear. And imagine going to the poles of the Earth, the North Pole or the South Pole, where it's 24 hours of light or dark. That AM/PM indicator at the time would have been really important, as would be the date. You have to, as an explorer that might find yourself in a situation where you're just trying to stay alive for 72 hours, be able to look at your watch later and know, I'm sorry, is it 5 in the morning or 5 in the afternoon? And how long have I been here? How many days have I been here? As a traveler is super important because you got to be able to think, I think I've been here for 5 days, but was it 6? Does my plane leave tomorrow? All right, you need your watch to give you that information. And so that is the real explorer, if you will. So what is the regular Explorer? Well, at best, it's a Sporty Oyster Perpetual, or it's a tribute. It's a homage watch. It's a piece of marketing for Joe Blow, who wants to feel like he has an Explorer. Probably won't ever go out of his backyard or his state or his country, but he'll be able to put that on and pretend to be Hillary for a day, all right? But a lot of people love that watch, especially modern Rolex wearers, and they'll get it, and it's like a coming to Jesus moment. Oh, the beauty, the simplicity, and it makes perfect sense because at this day and time when Rolex watches are very shiny and eye-catching, to say the least, not very humble pieces with polished middle links and Jubilee bracelets and shiny Cerachrome bezels, the Explorer can be a breath of fresh air. It's a subtle watch, and I imagine WJ, with your collection, with your fluted bezeled Datejust 41, your Yachtmaster with the polished middle links and shiny surfaces, your Jubilee braceleted Cerachrome bezeled GMT Master 2 BLNR, and even your shiny Cerachrome no date sub, that putting on that watch could be kind of nice. It's gonna feel subtle, and you're gonna know you're wearing a Rolex watch without it being obvious to everyone. And I think that's what people love about the watch. They love it because it's boring, and that's the other side of the coin when it comes to simplicity and classic design, right? And should you get that watch? Well, do you want a subtle watch? Do you want to wear a Rolex when you don't want to wear a Rolex? Do you want to wear a Rolex when you don't want to be seen wearing a Rolex? Do you want something subtle that flies, as we say, under the radar? Is that something you want? Well, you might want to look at an Explorer if that appeals to you, but it's a simple watch. It's an overly simple watch. There's no date, there's no extra function, and my guess is you're going to get bored. My guess is you're going to probably, if you get that watch, develop a love-hate relationship with it. When you first put it on, it's a love relationship, I'm sure, and it's like, wow, it's just simple and nice, and you know, just a good all-around honest watch, right? But it's not going to have the information you might need or want, something like your GMT Master 2 would have. No date, no rotating bezel. It's ultra simple. And I imagine after a week of wearing it, you don't want to put something else on. So it's probably going to be a balance of really appreciating its simplicity and its subtlety and getting really sick of it and how little it has to offer. But in terms of investment and value retention, and we got to talk about this because it's a dynamic, we can't just ignore it, right? In terms of that, it's not the strongest of the professional models. I mean, much stronger than a two-tone Datejust, and you can't find them in stores, but they don't sell for that much more on the pre-owned market or the gray market. So if you buy one and you wear the hell out of it and it gets banged up, you'll probably maybe break even, maybe lose a little bit of money on it, but it's not one of those watches that you walk in and you see and you think, man, I've hit the jackpot today, all right? Now, you need to ask yourself, is it a watch that you'd want? And if you just look at the watch in and of itself, it's a fine watch. If you start to dig down into its history, I don't think it makes a lot of sense. And I think if you're a purist, the OP should be something you'd want to look at, and if nothing else, for those awesome dial colors. And if you want a true Explorer, well, that would be the Explorer 2. All right, just ask Reinhold Messner or Ed Vestiers. That's what they chose. And the idea of choosing an Explorer as a travel watch just doesn't make a lot of sense. And if you were actually going to summit Mount Everest, it would be a bit of a joke to choose that watch. Although people have and people do, because it's a nod to that point in history. So there you have it, WJ. I think that covers the Explorer. Would I recommend you get it? Well, no, unless you want a simple watch. I can't see myself going that route. I'd probably be more of an Oyster Perpetual guy, but again, after a month of wearing an Oyster Perpetual, I'm going to be dying for the date. I'm going to be dying for a rotating bezel, an informational bezel, a GMT hand, something, a chronograph, anything. We'll tackle the other two pieces in your third and final video. And guys, what the hell is an Explorer? Is it a Sporty Oyster Perpetual? Is it a tribute, a homage to the Everest watch or the start of the Rolex steel professional watches? Or is it a legitimate watch for explorers? Okay, come on, can't be that. But let me know what you think. Thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you next time.